Errol Flynn was one of Hollywood's most charismatic leading men, a swashbuckling figure whose on-screen heroics often masked a turbulent private life. His reputation for dashing romantic roles, from Captain Blood to The Adventures of Robin Hood, made him an international star by his mid-20s. Yet behind the glamorous image lay a life tangled in controversy, beset by allegations of statutory rape, questionable relationships with underage women, chronic substance abuse, and persistent rumors, true or not, of hidden political sympathies. When he died at just 50, his body showed the ravages of an existence defined by restless hedonism and personal excess. The scandals that enveloped him, particularly his infamous trial on charges of statutory rape in 1943, and the whispers that persisted after his death, have ensured that Flynn's legacy remains as complicated as it is enduring. He was as famous for his off-screen escapades as he was for the daring heroes he portrayed on film. Born in 1909 in Hobart, Tasmania, Flynn came to Hollywood in the early 1930s and found almost immediate success. He had a rakish charm, a handsome face, and an athletic build that lent itself to sword fights, pirate adventures, and anything requiring robust physicality. Audiences adored him. Yet even as his star ascended, observers noted his propensity for risk-taking in both personal and professional realms. Friends and acquaintances spoke of a restlessness that fueled every decision. Hollywood loved him. Society columns couldn't get enough of him. But Flynn's cavalier approach to life soon drew trouble. His biggest scandal exploded in October 1942, when he was 33. He was charged with 2 counts of statutory rape involving 2 teenage girls, Betty Hansen, age 17, and Peggy Satterlee, age 15. Although the incidents allegedly took place at different times and in separate locations, both cases became conjoined in the public's imagination. Betty Hansen's claims centered on a Bel Air party hosted by Flynn's friend Frederick McAvoy, where she said Flynn had assaulted her. Peggy Satterlee alleged an assault on Flynn's yacht, the Sirocco, the previous year. The girls were aspiring actresses, and in a movie industry rife with power imbalances, the story of a matinee idol preying on young hopefuls ignited headlines nationwide. The press relished every salacious detail, and Flynn suddenly found himself depicted not as the gallant hero, but as a predatory figure. The trial began in January 1943 in Los Angeles. Flynn, accustomed to the pampered world of movie stardom, now faced a very different spotlight. His defense team, led by the formidable Jerry Giesler, worked swiftly to undermine the credibility of the girls. Betty Hansen was portrayed as a promiscuous teenager who had already had several relationships, a revelation meant to discredit her claim of innocence. Peggy Satterlee's timeline and recollection of events came under scrutiny. The courtroom drama reached lurid heights when Satterlee claimed Flynn had called her JB, short for jailbait, a word that would forever attach itself to his legend. Flynn steadfastly denied the allegations, maintaining that he'd had no improper relations with either girl. The trial was brief, 9 days in total, but intense. The jury, notably dominated by women, acquitted him on February 6, 1943. Some observers argued that his star power had overshadowed the evidence, and that the publicity of the case made it harder to convict an icon at the height of his fame. Others took the view that neither girl had presented an ironclad story. Whatever the truth, Flynn walked away a free man. The scandal birthed the phrase "in like Flynn," reflecting the public's perception that he had escaped conviction largely because of his celebrity. While his career suffered temporarily, Warner Brothers delayed some of his film releases to gauge audience reaction. He rebounded swiftly. War movies such as Objective Burma, in 1945 reaffirmed his box office draw. Yet the trial forever changed how the public viewed him. No longer the simply charming rogue, Flynn carried the taint of a man whose private pursuits might be as dangerous as they were decadent. In hindsight, critics note that the era's legal and moral standards worked in his favor. Modern observers reviewing the evidence often judge the situation more harshly, pointing to the uneven power dynamics and the youth of his accusers. The statutory rape trial did not mark the end of accusations about Flynn's behavior with teenage girls. Tales of his preference for very young women circulated through Hollywood for years before and after his acquittal. In 1942, while the trial itself was ongoing, he met Nora Eddington, a 16-year-old who worked at the courthouse cigar stand. He married her in 1943 when she turned 19 and they had 2 daughters together. By the late 1950s, rumors swirled around his relationship with Beverly Adlin, who was only 15 when they began seeing each other and Flynn was 48. That relationship lasted until his death in 1959. Beverly's mother, Florence Adlin, would later claim Flynn had plans to marry Beverly and referred to her affectionately as Woodsy in his letters. Though no criminal charges arose from that particular situation, it added to the ongoing sense that Flynn habitually crossed moral boundaries. Such relationships, while not always illegal under the looser age of consent laws of the time, stand in glaring conflict with modern ethical standards. Flynn's candid remarks in his posthumously published memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, did little to quell the controversy, as he openly boasted about such dalliances. Alongside questions about his sexual conduct, Flynn's reputation became entwined with rampant substance abuse. By the 1940s, and especially in the 1950s, his heavy drinking and reputed drug use were open secrets. Hollywood insiders whispered about his fondness for morphine, cocaine, and, above all, alcohol. He would inject morphine during film shoots, friends claimed, to quell pain and chase euphoria. He was also famous for hosting wild parties on his yacht, the Sirocco, which tabloids described as epic gatherings fueled by liquor, questionable substances, and abundant female companions. Flynn was arrested in 1952 in France for public drunkenness, and a later incident in Cuba underscored his decline. On set, his reliability waned. He sometimes collapsed or simply disappeared after nights of hard partying. By the time he was filming The Roots of Heaven in 1958, colleagues noted how drastically his once athletic physique had deteriorated, and he needed increasing medical intervention to get through even minor scenes. Though none of these episodes led to serious criminal charges, they added to the growing sense that his personal demons were overwhelming him. Another controversy dogged Flynn during World War II when rumors circulated that he harbored Nazi sympathies. This gossip was fueled by his association with an Austrian doctor named Hermann Erben, whom some suspected of being a German agent. Erben's shadowy background, combined with Flynn's 1937 trip to Spain during its Civil War, encouraged speculation that the swashbuckling star was more than just a curious tourist. In 1980, Charles Hyam's sensational book, Errol Flynn, The Untold Story, alleged that Flynn had spied for the Nazis, citing questionable sources and circumstantial evidence. Flynn always denied such charges, and no credible documentation has ever emerged to substantiate them. FBI files do not confirm any pro-Nazi activities, and many historians consider Hyam's claims to be exaggerated or baseless. Flynn's defenders point to his pro-Allied war films and the fact that any official suspicion against him likely would have resulted in more direct government action had there been real proof. Still, the rumor lingered, tarnishing his wartime image and adding yet another layer to his troubled off-screen persona. By the mid-1950s, it was clear that the debonair hero from Captain Blood had become a shadow of his former self. His face had grown gaunt, his body ravaged by decades of substance abuse, and the film roles he took on reflected a diminishing star trying to stay afloat. Hollywood producers occasionally cast him in cameo appearances that capitalized on his roguish legend, but the grand roles were largely behind him. His personal life, too, sank deeper into chaos. Divorced multiple times, entangled with underage girlfriends, in debt from lavish spending, and loathed by moral watchdogs, Flynn nonetheless remained a figure who could command press attention. He was, in essence, the perfect embodiment of the bad boy star, undeniably talented, but undone by his own impulses. In October 1959, Flynn traveled to Vancouver, Canada, accompanied by Beverly Adland. Despite his failing health, he was looking to sell his yacht, the Zaka, to a local businessman named George Caldo. Whether or not Flynn intended to settle down, or perhaps turn a corner in his life, is unclear. What is known is that on October 14th, he was at Caldo's apartment drinking and socializing when he began complaining of severe back and leg pain. He lay down, still in distress. Adland found him unresponsive a short time later. Rushed to Vancouver General Hospital, Flynn was pronounced dead. He was only 50 years old. The autopsy revealed a myocardial infarction, essentially a heart attack, exacerbated by coronary artery disease, cirrhosis of the liver from chronic alcoholism, and a generally fatty liver condition that spoke to years of bodily neglect. Traces of morphine were also found, though not in sufficient quantity to be deemed the immediate cause of death. The medical examiner famously said that Flynn's body resembled that of a 75-year-old man. In the immediate aftermath, rumors ran wild. Some claimed he had died in the midst of a sexual encounter with Adland. Others hinted at a hidden drug overdose, or that the local authorities were covering up a more scandalous scenario. None of these stories have borne the weight of evidence. Adland herself consistently refuted the notion of a lurid final moment. Medical findings showed no sign of foul play or overdose, only an overtaxed body giving out after years of stress, addiction, and chronic illness. Flynn's remains were flown back to Los Angeles, where a second autopsy confirmed the findings from Vancouver. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, on October 20th, 1959, beneath a willow tree. Although once proud of his Tasmanian heritage, he ended up interred in the storied grounds where so many Hollywood legends lie. His estate, valued at approximately $2.5 million, equivalent to around $25 million today, was largely consumed by debts, though. His third wife, Patrice Wymore, and his daughters did inherit portions of what remained. Naturally, Flynn's death did nothing to quell public fascination with his life. If anything, the mystique only grew. Over the 1960s and beyond, rumors circulated about secret diaries, missing scandalous footage, or final confessions. There were outlandish claims that he'd faked his death, or that some hush-hush government agency had done him in because of alleged espionage ties. Blogs, tabloid magazines, and even cable television specials sometimes revisit these claims, yet few hold up under scrutiny. Flynn's demise, sad as it was, appears simply to have been the predictable end for a man who lived too hard for too long. The Nazi sympathizer accusations still surface from time to time, often citing the discredited Chaim book, but mainstream historians reject these as sensational nonsense. Looking at the overall pattern of Flynn's scandals, it's difficult to single out which one was the most damaging. By any measure, the statutory rape trial of 1943 represented the darkest, most legally perilous episode in his life. Though he was acquitted, The trial recast him as a figure whose indulgences might skirt the law. Then there are his many relationships with teenagers, which did not always violate the statutes of their era, but certainly alarm modern audiences who see them as predatory. The question arises, how would Hollywood and the public react if the same circumstances unfolded today? The answer is that Flynn's career might have ended far more abruptly, with a different social climate and stricter enforcement of age of consent laws. Still, in the 1930s through the 1950s, the industry closed ranks around its stars, and fans often found a way to rationalize or dismiss off-screen offenses if they adored someone's performances. Flynn's drug and alcohol use contributed significantly to his downfall. While seldom framed as a scandal in the legal sense, aside from occasional arrests for drunkenness, the consistency of these episodes tarnished his public image. Producers who once banked on his popularity worried about his on-set reliability. Tales of orgies and wild parties, often involving underage participants, may have been exaggerated in some cases, but they reflected a real cycle of hedonism. After all, enough of these stories cropped up in different places and from different sources to paint a picture of a man who believed the rules did not apply to him. He had grown accustomed to special treatment, and he indulged as far as it would go. By the 1950s, it was evident that his body couldn't sustain that pace. His final years, marked by debt, ill health, and sometimes dismal film roles, contrasted sharply with the swashbuckling legend his fans so revered. As for the alleged Nazi sympathies, that rumor persists in part because it offers a dramatic twist on his roguish persona. What if Hollywood's golden swashbuckler had a dark political secret? Yet for all the conspiratorial excitement that claim generates, scholars and Flynn's defenders highlight a lack of substantive evidence. The rumor gained traction only in the latter part of his life, and especially after his death, when he could no longer defend himself. Documents unsealed by intelligence agencies show no conclusive proof of him collaborating with Nazi agents or even harboring pro-fascist leanings. Historians typically categorize these allegations as salacious gossip, perhaps born out of the simple fact that Flynn was friendly with questionable figures. He traveled the world, met myriad people, and seldom checked their backgrounds in an era when global politics were in upheaval. That vulnerability to unsavory company, especially with his easygoing, thrill-seeking nature, could certainly have led to association with the wrong crowds, but a leap from casual friendship to active espionage is enormous and unsubstantiated. Flynn's death, far from sensational in its actual cause, became sensational in myth. Some fans and conspiracy theorists claim they prefer to believe a more dramatic story, something that befits the star who so passionately brought adventure to the silver screen. But the coroner's report is clear. His heart simply could not withstand any more strain. He had, by that stage, the physiology of an old man, decades beyond his chronological age. That final collapse in Vancouver was abrupt, but hardly inexplicable to those who had witnessed his downward spiral. His posthumously released memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, came out in December 1959 and only added to the gossip. Flynn, in his own words, embraced the wicked narrative, describing liaisons, personal philosophies, and a philosophy of living for pleasure. The book was an instant bestseller, fueling the half-appalled, half-fascinated public curiosity that had always accompanied him. Some readers saw it as a cheeky confession, others as a heavily embellished marketing ploy. Either way, the memoir ensured that controversies would continue to shape his identity even after the grave. Flynn's cinematic achievements remained significant. Over the course of his career, he starred in 53 films, many of them major box office hits. Adjusted for inflation, these films grossed hundreds of millions of dollars, placing him squarely among the most bankable movie stars of the 1930s and 1940s. He was an innovator in the action-adventure genre, setting precedents for how fight scenes could be choreographed and how dashing heroes could be portrayed. His comedic timing, good looks, and natural flair endeared him to audiences for nearly 3 decades. Yet, it is impossible to discuss Errol Flynn without confronting the darker aspects of his life. Even in an era known for moral leniency toward male stars, Flynn's excesses stood out. For modern observers, the revelations about underage women render him a troubling figure. The question arises whether his personal behavior can, or should, be separated from his artistic legacy. He was, after all, a gifted performer and an undeniable cinematic icon, who became in many ways the template for swashbuckling heroes. But can one admire the artistry without condoning the man? It's a debate that echoes through Hollywood and cultural discourse more broadly. Those who champion Flynn's work argue that his personal failings and the incomplete evidence in some allegations do not negate his on-screen accomplishments. Others maintain that moral accountability should be part of any legacy assessment. The balance is left to individual discretion, though it's hard to ignore the dissonance between the inspiring characters he portrayed and the questionable episodes of his real life. Despite all of the controversies, one fact is clear. Flynn's name still resonates. His flair for action and romance shaped Hollywood's vision of the leading man. When we think of swashbuckling epics, Flynn's face is likely the first that comes to mind, rapier in hand, grin on his lips, leaping into battle with unflinching bravado. His style influenced generations of adventure films, from costume dramas to modern blockbusters. But for every effervescent duel on screen, there remains a tabloid-laced story about a teenage companion, a drunken escapade, a near-fatal bender, or a scurrilous rumor about espionage. As of now, decades after his death, Errol Flynn's story is still told and retold because it offers a cautionary tale of how stardom and indulgence can destroy from within. He was not the only star of his era to live on the edge, but his escapades were among the most publicized. The statutory rape trial remains a case study in how the judicial system can be influenced by celebrity, especially in a time when modern notions of consent and victim protection were not yet mainstream. The subsequent revelations of relationships with other minors suggest that even the trial's outcome did not dissuade him from continuing such behavior. Fans and critics who delve deeper discover a man who seemed incapable of or uninterested in controlling his appetites, someone who spun out of control until his body finally gave in. When reflecting on the precise moment of Flynn's death, alone with a teenage girlfriend in a Vancouver apartment, complaining of pain, then quietly slipping away, it has none of the epic drama of a final sword fight. It was an intimate, ignoble passing. No film camera rolled, no grand final line was delivered. The excitement that fueled his on-screen persona and personal lifestyle had already taken its toll on his heart. The scattered rumors surrounding his last breath are, in many ways, a testament to how thoroughly people wanted to inject cinematic flair into the final curtain of a man who had lived so flamboyantly. But by all accounts, it was simply a heart attack triggered by decades of wear and tear. His funeral, held on October 20th, 1959, drew friends, co-stars, ex-wives, and a curious public. He was buried in the famous Forest Lawn Memorial Park, far from his Tasmanian roots but alongside other luminaries of the industry that made him famous. That might seem a bittersweet resting place for someone who had once soared so high in the entertainment firmament. The estate he left behind, worth millions on paper, was quickly consumed by creditors. His daughter Deirdre, daughter Rory, and his then-wife Patrice Wymore received only fragments of what might otherwise have been a fortune. In the aftermath, the release of My Wicked, Wicked Ways only strengthened the roguish legend. The memoir's candid confessions, real or embellished, captured the public imagination. He had always known how to put on a show, and in death, he managed to deliver one last performance through his written words. Over the decades, fans seeking proof of the real Errol Flynn find themselves confronted with equal parts of documented vice, rumored depravity, and extraordinary cinematic charm. He is, in the end, a reminder that heroes in the movies are not always heroes in life, and that behind every dramatic escapade captured on film, there may lurk a genuine tragedy waiting to unfold. Flynn's final chapter, alone on a couch in Vancouver, undone by his own vices, seems almost too quiet for the man who once dueled Basil Rathbone in the flickering glow of Technicolor. Yet it is precisely that contrast, heroic illusions against a messy reality, that continues to define the saga of Errol Flynn.